President Putin spoke about the special relationship between Russia and Mr. Trump. Experts say it will be difficult for President Biden to negotiate with Russia about Ukraine before the election. Mr. Putin assessed China-Russia relations and foreign affairs. Experts say the U.S. sees the Russian defense system in Crimea as a test target. President Putin spoke about the special relationship between Russia and Mr. Trump. Russian President Vladimir Putin affirmed that Moscow does not have any special relationship with former U.S. President Donald Trump, although Trump repeatedly said he had a good relationship with the Russian leader. "We never had any special relationship with Mr. Trump, but the fact that as president he started imposing harsh sanctions on Russia, he withdrew from the treaty on medium-range and short-range missiles," President Putin said on June 5. President Putin said that Russia does not care who will become the next president of the United States after the election later this year, because no matter who it is, it will hardly change the relationship between Russia and America. After Russia launched its military campaign in Ukraine in 2022, relations between Moscow and Washington reached their lowest point since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. To say that we believe that the presidential election in the U.S. will lead to a major change in U.S. policy towards Russia, I affirm that we do not. We do not think so. We think that there will be no significant change. Tell me, he said. However, the Kremlin owner does not rule out the possibility of policy adjustments in Washington because the U.S. is starting to pay more attention to national interests. No one in America cares about Ukraine, they care about the greatness of America, which is fighting not for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people but for its own greatness, Mr. Putin explained. The Russian leader continued, "If the future U.S. administration changes its goals and finds it necessary to strengthen America from within, strengthen the economy, finance, and build good relationships around the world, there may still be changes." Mr. Trump is currently a bright presidential candidate of the U.S. Republican Party. While in office, Mr. Trump imposed a series of sanctions on Russia and withdrew from the agreement with Russia. However, the former owner of the White House repeatedly affirmed that he has a good relationship with President Putin. Recently, Mr. Trump announced that if he is re-elected, he can get Russia to release the American journalist being detained by Moscow. The Kremlin later rejected this statement, affirming that Russia did not have any contact with Mr. Trump on this issue. Experts say it will be difficult for President Biden to negotiate with Russia about Ukraine before the election. U.S. President Joe Biden is unlikely to accept negotiations with Russia on Ukraine before the next November election to demonstrate his strength and determination, an American expert said. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said he is ready to negotiate about Ukraine. President Joe Biden likely won't accept that offer until after the November election for fear of being seen as weak. He wants to show how strong and determined he is so that candidate Donald Trump cannot use his age against him, said Peter Kuznick, director of the Institute for Nuclear Research at American University. Professor Kuznick commented further, "The danger is that if we don't cool down this situation in Ukraine, we may not last until November." Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump are currently two bright presidential candidates for the race to the White House, taking place later this year. While Mr. Biden's administration has approved tens of billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine, Mr. Trump vowed to cut aid and force Ukraine to sit at the negotiating table with Russia if he is re-elected. Mr. Putin assessed China-Russia relations and foreign affairs. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that nothing will change in Russia-US relations, regardless of who wins the upcoming U.S. presidential election. According to a Vietnam news agency correspondent in the Russian Federation, President Putin made the above comment during a meeting with heads of Russian and international media agencies on the sidelines of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on June 5. He affirmed, "We will work with any president the American people elect." Regarding Russia-China relations, President Putin said that Beijing has been Moscow's main trade and economic partner for the past 15 years, and bilateral trade turnover is currently higher than expected, according to Russian statistics. $230 billion, while according to Chinese statistics it is $240 billion. In addition, the two countries also have many cooperation in the technical and military fields. Regarding Russia-Japan relations, Mr. Putin said that, at the present time, the situation is not favorable for continuing to conduct dialogue on the peace treaty between the two countries, but believes that Russia can dialogue with Japan. Japan after Tokyo reconsidered its position on the Ukraine issue. Regarding the Ukraine issue, the Russian leader said that if the country finds that Western countries are drawn into a conflict against Russia, it is an act of direct participation and Moscow has the right to respond. Mr. Putin warned that this will lead to very serious problems. President Putin affirmed that Russia is always ready to negotiate, but this must be the common desire of all parties to be realized. He hopes that relations between Russia and the West as well as the world in general will gradually move towards peace, instead of constantly escalating. President Putin emphasized that Russia has no imperialist ambitions and denied information that Russia plans to attack the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Regarding sanctions aimed at Russia, President Putin said that Western countries plan to weaken the Russian economy for a period of 3 to 6 months, but this could not be done, while the goal he set to bring the country into the top 4 economies in the world has been achieved. Mr. Putin emphasized that it is important to maintain the pace of development. Russia will start producing everything it needs on its own, and it's just a matter of time. Experts say the U.S. sees the Russian defense system in Crimea as a test target. Expert Dmitry Drozdenko said that the U.S. military considers the Russian defense system in the Crimea Peninsula a threat and a target for testing. The comment was made by scholar Dmitry Drozdenko, military analyst and editor-in-chief of Arsenal Homeland newspaper, when commenting on information about a U.S. Global Hawk drone flying over neutral waters in the Black Sea is close to the Crimean Peninsula for the second day in a row. He explained that the drone had previously turned off its transponder, a control device that receives and automatically responds to incoming signals, which he said led to the UAV temporarily disappearing from the site following follow Flight Radar 24. Mr. Drozdenko also said that the Global Hawk's change of route on June 4 could indicate a provocative attempt by the UAV to detect Russian air defense systems in this area, to help the Ukrainian army attack them. Later, the analyst added that no action was expected against the drone as it remained in international waters, but logically, the UAV should have been shot down. According to Flight Radar 24 data, the Northrop Grumman RQ-4B Global Hawk aircraft is currently monitoring southeast Crimea at an altitude of about 16.7 kilometers. On June 4, the drone briefly left Romanian airspace before flying back. Russian experts emphasized that the majority of attacks on Crimea and Russian targets in the Krasnodar territory were carried out by the armed forces of Ukraine after US and NATO reconnaissance aircraft appeared in the northern sky and east of the Black Sea. This cannot be just a coincidence. The presence of American reconnaissance planes, as they circled the sky for several hours, followed by missile attacks, suggests coordination. This reality has given rise to a series of proposals from the Russian military about the need to reduce the level of threat from missile and drone attacks carried out by Ukraine. One of the options being actively discussed is the establishment of a no-fly zone over the Black Sea airspace. According to the assessment of Russian scholars, currently such a decision has not been discussed at the highest level, but the creation of a no-fly zone, even if it is only aimed at NATO drones, is considered a measure necessary to protect the safety of Russia's military targets and economic center.